Hello. Suppose you want to get a car and you want to know how much it's going to cost to get a loan for that. How would you figure it out? Of course, there's a formula for that, and here's an example worked out. It just comes from this formula right here. And if you like math, maybe that doesn't intimidate you, but for a lot of people, they might not really want to do those calculations. Or if you're interested in a mortgage and you want to know the monthly payment, here's an example of that as well. Again, for a lot of people, this formula isn't going to be very attractive. And so when we're doing math modeling, we need to have both a model that's useful but also usable. And by that I mean it needs to be something that someone that is either your audience or your client will actually use, and that they won't be put off by something that's either confusing or complicated. And so the way we implement and report our results is going to be important. So the first step is, if you're giving some sort of presentation or a written report, some sort of summary of your model, it's important that you clearly communicate. And of course, there's lots of courses and things written about good communication skills. But something a little more specific to modeling is the implementation part of the report the results stage. And in my opinion, there's about 4 different ways to implement a model that is more than just a final answer that you might give a client. The first one of those might just be a chart. And you may have seen an example of this when it comes to calculating a percentile for a child's weight or length. So here's an example from the CDC for boys of 0 to 3 years. And if you look at this chart, you can immediately find the percentile for that baby's length and weight. And once you get used to this chart, it's not too bad to use. There's no calculations involved, and then you can move on. Sometimes a physical tool is an option. We've seen an example of that. Here's a sensor that not only collects data, but also warns us when the carbon dioxide level gets too high. Notice the screen turns black, and if you want, it will even beep for you. So that's an example of a physical tool that will implement whatever we're trying to do for a model. The third example goes back to our situation with the formulas. If we have a messy formula, sometimes an online calculator is a better way to implement the model. Here's one such example. Notice it gives the same result of a payment of $1,264 if you're borrowing $200,000 for 30 years at this particular interest rate. But this calculator, you didn't have to do any formulas. You can just type in your numbers. And if you want to change the number, say to 7%, then it automatically calculates a new rate, and you don't have to do any more calculation than that. And it even goes beyond what that basic formula from the Wikipedia page shows, because it takes into account PMI and taxes and insurance and so forth. And it even gives an option for editing those numbers as appropriate. So something like this is easy to use and is more likely to be used by the majority of people than a formula that looks like this. So these are all things to keep in mind when you're implementing the model. Now, if you have a model that is not so complex and you're willing to sacrifice some error, there is a 4th option, and that's what I would call a rule of thumb. These are generally not as good as a model that we might discuss in this course, but you've seen it. Maybe the 2-second rule when you're driving a car and how close you should follow someone in front of you, or the rule of 72 if you're trying to estimate how long it will take for your money to double in an investment. These things are blunt tools, but they give us a ballpark number. And if that's all we need, then that's a nice effective tool that doesn't require an internet connection. It doesn't require a tool or even a chart. We can just quickly estimate it in our head or with a simple calculator. Now, we'll see an example of this in the next video where we'll go into more detail about these. We'll see you there.